All right, welcome in for another edition of Betting After Dark. Anita Marks with Ashley Mailloux. Ashley, how you doing? Big weekend ahead in Saratoga, right?
Yeah, Travers Stakes. I mean, it's a big weekend of racing in general for both thoroughbreds and standardbreds. The Hambletonian's $1 million race. That's on Saturday. And then obviously the $1 million Travers.
So I'm curious, because obviously, a lot of people in the industry, not fans aren't allowed to be at the racetrack, but I would imagine that there are a lot of people that are heading. And I could be wrong. I would just imagine a lot of people heading to Saratoga. It's that time of year. Hopefully, they're still exercising social distancing, doing things outside. But are there going to be a lot of people in Saratoga to kind of take in the festivities?
Yeah, I think so. I know from people like talking to different people in the industry that are involved that are there and get to go to the races for various reasons. With the way Saratoga's kind of set up, obviously, when you go like down Broadway, there's a lot of restaurants and shopping and stuff, and there's a lot of outdoor seating. I know certain places such as like the Adelphi Hotel and Saratoga National had little packages where you could like rent a table and set up, and they'd like project the races on a big screen. So I know that's been really popular, which I think is cool because you're still in Saratoga, which the town is, if you haven't been, it's awesome. I always recommend for people to go to Saratoga. I think it's like the ultimate spot. I'm biased. I'm from New York, but I think it's the best track that I've ever been to. So definitely there's still a lot to do there, obviously, while still social distancing and all that stuff. But I think, that it's great that you can still go to Saratoga and go to these other places to still watch the races.
All right, for those that might be heading to Saratoga, maybe you're not, maybe you're going to be watching the Travers at home. You could go online and you could wager. We're going to break down 4 races for you. And so the first race that we're going to start off with is race 7, the Ballerina Stakes. The 4-horse is what's favored. Now, what I find interesting in doing, the research I have getting ready for your expertise, Ashley, and that is there's 3 horses in this race that at one point in time in their career were really at the top of their division. But they're coming into this race all coming off of losses and disappointing efforts. So I'm really intrigued in how you're going to handicap this race. And let's start with the one that's favored, and that's the 4-horse.
Yeah, I think Bellafina is going to be really tough in here. We always talk about how we think the race is going to unfold, and looking at other runners in here, I think there's plenty of pace. The 5 Latruska and the 2 Cookie Dough are very fast, and I think, in general, horses can close from off the pace, but I don't think you want to be too far off the pace. And a horse like Bellafina is going to be right there in the action. Don't get me wrong, she's been on the front end before, but if you look at her last 2 efforts, she's been able to kind of settle from off the pace and make a run. Now, last time out, you see her race at Los Alamitos Racecourse going 6.5, so slightly shorter than today. So this is 7 furlongs. This is 1 turn. 6.5, not a huge difference. I'm not worried about it. But she closed from off the pace. She was the favorite. She had a good run in the end. Obviously, she was heavily favored. They thought she'd win. She was just second best that day. But you look at the race before that at Santa Anita, that was a grade 3. Now, that was a good effort. She closed from mid-pack. She was 3 lengths off the lead at one point. She won by a length, and it was a pretty easy win for her. Now, kind of looking at her previous races, she actually has made an appearance at Saratoga in the past. That was in the test. So we'll talk about that race in a little bit. But she finished 3rd in the test. She was well beaten. Kafethi was the winner of that, and then Serengeti Empress, who's another runner in this race this year. So they've met up several times in the past. But those 2 were kind of clear of the field, and she just managed to hang on for 3rd in there. So she actually only has 1 win since that effort. But, you mentioned some of these horses have really strong previous form. She, as a 2-year-old racing the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly, she was 4th. And then after that, she was kind of on a roll. She won 3 races in a row, including the Santa Anita Oaks, and she won it with ease. I just think with her, kind of looking at her performances, she's going to like the 7 furlongs. She's going to get a good trip. I think there's enough speed for her, so she looks pretty tough on paper.
All right. Some other horses that very well could contend. Let's talk about Come Racing, who, from what I understand, last year won this same race.
Yeah, so we'll look at the number 7, Come Dancing. This one did win this race last year. We can kind of start with that performance. It was a big effort from her. Kind of looking at her trajectory going into this race, they raced her 3 times prior, and each start they kind of bumped her up. When you look at her first start of 2019, she had the winner off She had a good performance at Aqueduct. It was a huge number. You can see that 114 highlighted. That's a ridiculous buyer number. We always talk about the DRF. That's the number that we're going to use. That is huge. I mean, she went to the front and she just opened up on that field with ease. Then her next effort, she did the same thing in the grade 2 Ruffian. This is a race we've kind of talked about a little bit before. And then they put her in the Ogden Phipps. She tried to take them on the front end, but just was simply second best that day behind Midnight Bizu, who we saw last week. We talked about her. She actually was second. Vexatious upset her, but Midnight Bizu is very talented. So still a great performance from her in the Ogden Phipps. Then she went back on a win streak. I mean, she's a really great racehorse. I mean, look at her record. She's won half of her starts. She's 8 for 16. Now, looking at her this year, though, she only had 2 races. So they did the same thing with her. They gave her the winter off. They put her in the Apple Blossom, and she only beat 2 horses in a 14-horse race. It's worth noting that at that point, she was not in the barn of Carlos Martin. She was in the Dwayne Lucas barn, and now she's back with Carlos Martin. They've had 1 start, which was in the Vagrancy, and she was second behind Victim of Love, who is in this race as well. So I think, that was a decent effort to be reunited with the barn and whatnot. She does have 2 wins at Saratoga, and like you mentioned, she ran pretty big race here last year in this same event.
Okay, and I know there were 2 other horses here that you'd mentioned to me that let's take a look at. And one is the one horse who actually was the winner of the 2019 Kentucky Oaks. So what do you expect that horse to do in this race?
Yeah, she's interesting. If you look at Serengeti Empress, kind of going into the Kentucky Oaks, before that she failed in the Fairground Oaks as a heavy favorite. Then they put her in the Kentucky Oaks. It was a really big win from her. She took them gate to wire. She was 13-1 that day. Then after that, they put her in the Acorn, the Test. She had 2 runner-up placings and kind of went off track for a little bit. She was still 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Distaff behind, as we mentioned, Midnight Bizu was 2nd. The winner of that was Blue Prize. But looking at her efforts since then, the only win that she's had since the Kentucky Oaks, you can see, is 3 starts back in the Grade 2 Azeri. And once again in here, she was able to really get clear on the field. That's been a big thing for her. She likes to go to the front. You look at those races. That race was at 1 mile and a 16th. In her following start, and even the one after that, going over 1 mile, she really hasn't been the same horse. You can see in the Apple Blossom, she finished 11th, and then last time out in the Fleur de Lis, she was 4th. So yes, she's been facing really tough horses. You see CC, Ollie's Candy, Midnight Bizu, but I'm not sure, even though she has a good record at the distance, I'm not sure this is where I see her fitting in.
I don't know if that's your dog barking, but my dog
started.
I think my dog heard your dog barking and is now barking.
I have a bigger bark on my end. I will say that. This is like my mini guard dog who's on the other side of the door, like poking her nose. Hopefully no one's intruding.
All right, what kind of bark is that, Ashley? What is that?
She's like 90 pounds. She's a big dog. We don't mess around. But I do want to mention one other thing in here. The other horse that you kind of mentioned, there was another horse to look at, the 3 Victim of Love.
Right.
This horse scored a big upset last time out in the Vagrancy. It was 27-1 and beat Come Dancing. I would use this horse underneath. Looking at her, though, I mean, she's kind of been consistent. One of the big races in the winter at Laurel Park's the Barbara Fritchie, which is a Grade 3. She was 2nd behind Majestic Reason, the Graham Motion trainee, who I think since that effort's been retired. But, she didn't race a great race next time out in the Nellie Morse. But I think coming off such a big effort at Belmont Park, going 6.5 last time out, I don't think she'll have the lead here early on. I think she'll also track behind the 2 Cookie Dough and then the 5. And I think, maybe she can get a piece of it. I'm not sure she's this level. Obviously, we've talked about kind of the graded stakes as a Grade 1, but scored an upset last time. So I think she deserves at least a look in here.
All right. As always, before we move on to the next race, I always ask you, how are you going to play this? How are you going to bet this? Folks who are going to be betting online, what should they do, Ashley?
I do think it's going to be hard to beat Bellafina. So I would kind of look at the odds and decide if you want to play a win bet on her. But as far as an exacta, I got to go for a price. So what I would do is I would use Bellafina on top, and then underneath I would use the 7 Come Dancing and the 3 Victim of Love. I have to think I'm not sure how much money Serengeti Empress is going to take. I hope a lot, so that maybe the prices on other horses will be better. But I think Bellafina is my top pick, and then I'll look to the 3 and then the 7.
All right, fantastic. Let's move on to race number 8, the Troy Stakes, which I find interesting here. This is a turf sprint, but we're talking about horses that don't have a lot of early speed. So I'm really curious how you're going to handicap this. Who is the horse that's favored coming into this race?
So the horse on the rail, the one Empress, this is going to be your favorite. Now, the reason for this is this one's coming out of the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. So first off, we haven't seen this horse yet this year at all. So this is going to be a very long layoff for this one. Now, prior effort to that was a decent effort, was 3rd in the Woodford, which is one of the big turf sprints at Keeneland in the fall. Was beaten by 2 1/4. You see Steubens 1 and Leinster was 2nd. But this one closes from off the pace, and you bring up a good point. There's really not a lot of pace in this race. There's one horse that stands out, and he's wickedly quick. But I think looking at this specific gelding, if you look at his races in early 2019, you actually look at his first 2 starts. They put him in a small stakes race going 5 furlongs at Gulfstream Park. He rated from off the pace, but he was closer than his last 2 starts. I'll give him that. And you see that big number that turned around, 110 buyer. He won this race with ease. Then in his following start, they put him in the Grade 2 Shakertown, which is another sprint race at Keeneland. Those are the main 2 that you think about, the Woodford and the Shakertown. Was able to win by a neck in there, beat Bound for Nowhere, a very strong runner. And it was a deep field. You can see that. You can see 13 horses in there. But then they shipped this horse over to Ascot last spring, in June. Ran 6th, was beaten by 4 3/4. It was an okay effort. It wasn't great. And we haven't seen this one in the winner's circle since. So hopefully the time off, you'd have to think, would maybe help this gelding. I mean, he is a consistent runner. He's 7 for 13 in his career, but we really haven't seen his best performances towards the end of last year. So that's kind of a head scratcher. But I will say, if you look at this workouts, they're pretty consistent as far as timing, which is something I always like to see with either younger horses or horses that have had time off. And if you look in his case, his last 3 breezes, so you can kind of see that bottom where it says works and you go across. In the mornings, he's had these 3 strong workouts, and his most recent has been a step up. He breezed 4 furlongs in 47 3, which that's decent. You can see it's the 3rd fastest of 84. So seems to be training well. So I can see why he's the favorite. Now, there's other runners in here. I think this is actually probably a pretty wide open race in general, but he probably will be the first time favorite.
Are you surprised that Pure Sensation isn't favored, considering, no pun intended, the track record that he's had previously? I know that his first race back as a 9-year-old wasn't impressive. Is that a reason why?
Not necessarily why. I think there's more to it. Yeah, that was a disappointing effort. It was a Grade 1. You look at his race before that, the last time we saw him last year was in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and he finished 5th out of 12, and he actually went off as the favorite in there. He's beaten by 3 1/4 lengths. But I think the thing with him is, yes, he's older. He's still very quick. He will be part of the pace scenario. But if you look at his last 2 races, he hasn't really been part of the pace scenario. He's broke sharp for the most part, but except for that effort 2 back. But last time out, he broke sharp, and he still had some issues though. You can kind of see in the run line, it says that he lunged at the start. You can see though from the run line, it didn't cost him a lot of ground. In the other race, it did kind of cost him some ground. So I think with him, he needs to have a perfect break. He needs to go to the front. If he can do that, that'll put him in a better position for sure. I mean, you can see his other races when he gets the lead. He's been really tough. And it's worth noting, last year he raced in the Troy, and he had a great race. He didn't make the lead. He wasn't the fastest horse that day, but he finished 3rd. He was beaten by less than 2 lengths. So he's got 2 wins at Saratoga. I just hope in his case that he can break sharp, where I do like him in this spot. But, you also have to think, second time off the layoff, he should improve, except for, you kind of compare what's his past like. Did he need a race off the layoff? Last year he didn't. He came firing last year, but it was also a much easier spot. So it's kind of a juggling act to kind of put this into the equation and try to figure out what that means. It was a much softer spot when they raced him off the layoff last year. I will say that.
All right, so Pure Sensation, and then also we're going to talk about the 4-horse, but just to confirm, so both those horses, the 5 and the 4, have the same trainer, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So
They have the same trainer, but different owners.
okay, so how difficult is that? I would imagine, you've got, you got one dog in the fight, you got one horse in the race. Obviously you're rooting for that. It's got to be difficult. To me, it's like I'm a football gal, right? To me, it equates to like the Gronk family watching, their sons play, or the Watt family watching their sons TJ and JJ Watt play against each other. What do you do? Like, how difficult is that for a trainer to have more than one horse in a race?
I mean, it's tough. I don't train horses, but I know trainers, and I can kind of make, I guess, assumptions about how it would be. Hopefully my assumptions are correct. You know what they say when you assume. But in the case of a trainer, right, you're putting your horses in a spot where they can win. You have the owners, asking you, is my horse training well? Are we going in this spot? Are we going in this other spot instead? And you might get pressure from 2 owners and they want to go in the same spot. And I think there is some transparency. I'm sure if I'm going to enter another horse, I'm going to let the other owners know, right? And just say, hey, I'm entering 2 in here. I think it probably becomes more difficult when you have 2 horses that have the same run style. Because, for example, say you have 2 horses that they have a lot of speed. And I'm going to enter 2 different horses for 2 owners. And I know these horses both have speed. And then they got to battle it out on the front end. That's just kind of messy thing, right? You're kind of like almost setting yourself up. Because we always talk about like speed duels, for example. You can kind of lock up early, go really fast, and you both aren't around at the finish. So it's a fine line, I'm sure, too. One of your horses, hopefully they come in 1-2, but then, this horse won and the other one second. Should have we waited for another race? I'm sure it's a balance, but owners know that, especially at this level. For the most part, these owners will have other horses that are stakes horses, and they're kind of used to this. They've been in the game for a long time. So I don't think, the owners are worried like, oh, are we putting ourselves in here to be what they'd call like a rabbit? That's a common word used in racing, where sometimes you'll enter 2 horses and you will put a horse to the front and have that speed duel because the other horse can close from off the pace. I mean, those things do happen sometimes. But at this level and looking at these 2, I'm sure these owners, they want to race in the graded stakes. They think they have a good shot. They just both happen to be trained by Christophe Clement.
All right. So what do you anticipate from the 4-horse?
So it's interesting. He did show a decent amount of speed last year in early foot. I mean, you can kind of look at his last race here at Saratoga on August 30th. That was in the Lucky Coin, which is a little restricted stakes race. You can see there. They went 22-2, 44-1, which is really fast. And he set the pace there and he stayed. Tried to do the same thing in his next start. It didn't work out great for him. He still was second, beaten by just 3/4 of a length. And you can see since then, he really hasn't made the lead. He's just kind of been forwardly placed. You can see that in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. He was just a length or 2 off the leaders. He ended up finishing 3rd in there. So he's a horse. I mean, he's going to be really close to the pace. I don't think he'll be on the lead, where I think Pure Sensation, the goal will be to get him as close to the front as they can. But, we talked about Shecky Shabazz when we were covering Monmouth Park for the Haskell, because this race was the Wolf Hill, which was just like it says here, was an $82,000 race. But he was actually further back than he probably likes. So I do think he had somewhat of an excuse last time out. And he just, he was 3rd best in there. But for him, I think the ideal outcome for Shecky Shabazz is to be as close to the pace as he can be without being necessarily on the lead at this point. Because you asked about speed. And if you want to talk about a speedy horse in here who's going to be a price, that's the 2 American Sailor. This was another horse that I kind of wrote down and maybe I would use to see if he can hang around for a share. So off the get-go, I mean, this is a grade 3. You don't see a grade 3 listed on the past performances that we see here. He's an 8-year-old and he's just been racing in these smaller stakes races, but you can see from his record, I mean, he's pretty consistent. He's hanging around for minor shares. Now, he won 2 starts back at Laurel. It was his first race in about 7 or so months. And he went to the front and he was quick. Not as quick as we've seen him in the past, but he went 22-3 and then 45-3. Still a quick race. Not as quick as I think these horses will go. But he won that. And then last time out, he actually finished in front of Shecky Shabazz. He tried to do that same thing where he kind of opens up on the field. He goes as fast as he possibly can, and hopefully he sticks around. So he will definitely be part of the pace scenario. If you kind of look at the win streak he was on last year, Every half mile, they're only going, in this case, they're going 5.5. But when you're looking at the 4 furlong times, for all of his wins, he was below 45 seconds. He was at 44. Even he had a race that was below 44. It was 43 and 4. So he is wickedly quick. And I think, in my case, I would use him for third. I think he can stick around. I just think if him and, say, Pure Sensation lock up, that should set up for some other horses.
All right. So help us win some money here, Ashley. How are you going to play this race?
I do think the 1 is vulnerable off the layoff. I still think the horse could win. So in my case, when I look to bet this, I'm a little hesitant because actually I think this is a tough race. But what I'll do is I will use the 1 and the 5 on top, and I'll use the 2 and the 4 underneath. So this, if you want to play for an exacta, this is only going to cost $4. I mean, you're really going to hope that the 2 runs second because you'll get a pretty good return, or at least I anticipate that you will, because I think the horse will be a good price.
All right, fantastic. Let's move on to race number 10, the Test Stakes. Now, traditionally, right, this race is typically run on Whitney Day, and this is a really, really big race. So looking forward to it. And arguably, the 5 horse has to be, would you say, the best horse this season? I mean, regardless of gender, the fastest horse this season. So a lot of expectation coming into this race.
There is. I mean, she's very quick. We've only seen her 3 times, and she's shown growth with every start. And I think, off that most recent performance, we keep on saying buyer numbers. I mean, in the Grade 1 Acorn at Belmont, she went the mile distance, and here they're going 7 furlongs, so slightly shorter. But you look at that race, I mean, she's speedy. I mean, she goes to the front, she kind of gets out there, shakes clear, and she had 110 buyer, which, I mean, that towers over the field. The next closest horse you're going to see in here is Venetian Harbor with a 96. You can kind of see that kind of distinguishes her. But if you also look at what she won by, it's a ridiculous margin. She won by almost 19 lengths in the end. I mean, you think about 19 horses lined up, that's just incredible. Now, looking at the other horses in there, the Grade 1 Acorn, it was a good race. I don't think she, you can see by her margin, I think she was the classiest horse in the field. And mentioning, the race 2 starts back when she had that 98 buyer. That was going a mile and a 16 at Oaklawn, and you see that it says disqualified from purse money. So just to be transparent, there was a drug positive on her, a positive test. So in that case, what they do is you forfeit your purse money. So that's why it says right there, disqualified from purse money. And you can also see at her record now, she's only 2 for 3 lifetimes. So she is technically defeated because of that. Now, going then into the Acorn, there were questions about that. And the drug positive is a more recent thing that's come out in the last few weeks. But then she raced lights out in the Acorn. So just something to kind of be transparent about and throw in there. So she, in this race, it'll be very difficult to beat her. Extremely difficult. This is probably, if you're looking at the card, she's probably the lock of the day. I mean, she will be extremely tough to beat.
So let me, in regard to concerns, is there any concern because she ran so fast that it could have taken a lot out of her? Or is it, she's with Baffert and arguably one of the best trainers in the world. So does that counter that? Is there any concerns heading into this race for her, Ashley?
I think Bob wouldn't put her in this spot unless he thought she could win. And I'm not saying, I don't know. Is she up to 100% since that effort? I don't know. The way I say like 100%, I don't mean that there's anything wrong with her, but when you talk about like maximum security, when he won recently, right? Bob said, well, I only had him like up to 80%. He was only up to 80% on the scale. That doesn't mean that the horse is unsound. It just means he wasn't like cranked all the way. He wasn't training him as hard as he could have to prepare him for that race. Gamine coming off such a big effort, she's had plenty of time to kind of, rebound from that. She's had almost 6 weeks if you're looking at it, June 20th. I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, you're looking at her breezes since then too. They've breezed her 4 times and they've been pretty consistent. So yeah, she had a couple weeks off as far as published workouts go, but they've breezed her. And her most recent one, there's only 4 at the distance. It was the fastest. It says something we talked about breezes, but you kind of see that H there. Typically you see an H, which means handily, which means you're probably asking the horse for a little bit more than if you saw the B symbol there. 112 and 4. I mean, that's fine. I have no worries about her whatsoever.
All right. What about the 6 horse? This is a horse that drew the outside. So tactically, it sounds like nobody's going to be able to keep up with the speed that's going to be in this race with the horse that's favored. But, just drawing the outside, does that help this horse, give him a chance, a fighter's chance? Ashley, does he even have a fighter's chance?
I mean, to me, I think Venetian Harbor is probably the second standout in the race. So if you have to rank this, I think it's Gamine and then it's Venetian Harbor. Kind of thinking about tactics out of the gate. I mean, you're just trying to get a good position. And luckily, when a race like this, it's 7 furlongs, so it's only 1 turn. So when you look at Saratoga in the configuration, there's a chute that they use for the 7 furlong distance. You have such a long straightaway there that you only have 6 horses in the gate. You have plenty of time to get in a good position. This isn't like like I think about Gulfstream Park. If you have like a mile and a 16th there, and you have an outside post position 12, you don't have much time to get over. So you're already at a disadvantage being out that far. Where here, I mean, you have a straightaway. You kind of think about it as like a racetrack in general too. I mean, you have just a straightaway here. You have plenty of time. You can see that in the diagram that we zoomed in on here. So I'm not worried, especially with it being a compact field of 6 runners. Position, Gamine's faster. That's fine. If you're second fastest, well, you kind of just track behind Gamine and kind of move your way over. So I think tactically, Venetian Harbor has early foot. If you look at that effort 2 back, which was only her second start of 2020, that was in the Grade 3 Fantasy at Oaklawn Park in Arkansas. She was forwardly placed in there. They went 45 and 2 to the half, and they went 109 and 3 for 6 furlongs. She tired a little bit in the end, and it set up for Swiss Skydiver, who would win her following race, and she's had a lot of hype around her. That's a serious filly as well. So definitely, I think that was a great effort. And you see a performance like that, 45 and 2, and you compare it to Gamine's 45 and 1 at a mile, comparable to a mile and a 16th. I mean, Gamine's a little faster. I don't think it's going to be daylight necessarily, but that also depends on tactics. Is Joel Rosario really going to push Gamine all the way around, or how is he going to set this up? Last time out in Ashland, they tried the same thing with Venetian Harbor. They sent her to the front. She opened up a little bit, and then Speech, because this is another race I think we talked about. Speech just ended up drawing clear in the end. So, you can look at her record. She's got 2 wins. If she got 3 seconds, she typically tries her best to hold around for just a share, and she's done that her last 2. So she's definitely meeting a tough rival once again today.
All right. And last but not least, the 3 horse. I know this is another horse that you're looking at in this race.
Yeah, Miss Danvers has never tried a stakes race in her career, not even a ungraded stakes race. And now she's going for a grade 1. They're go big or go home, I guess. Looking at her races, she's going to come from off the pace. And the pace should be decent enough for her to do so. Kind of looking at her first start of her career, was going 6 furlongs. She was just a few lengths off. She kind of was green in the race, but she showed potential. Then next time out, she broke her maiden at Saratoga by over a length in the end. You see Finite was second, came back to win. I thought that was a pretty good effort. And then since then, she's been second in both of these allowance races that you see here, 6.5, then at a mile. Now they're going to cut her back slightly to 7 furlongs, which I kind of like moves like that. I think, just going slightly longer, slightly shorter can help a horse. But the big thing for her is the pace is going to be quick. The paces in her races have been decent as they are now, but I think her best chance is to close from off the pace. And you can see she's 8-1 morning line. So that actually puts her as the 3rd choice on paper.
All right. So how are you going to play this one?
Honestly, I don't know if I would play this race in a win bet or anything like that. I'll be honest. It's going to be tough because Gamine's 3-5 morning line. I have to think that this horse has the potential to go off at like 1-5, which is just, it's really tough. I mean, yes, she should win. So you will get your money back. But I mean, if you had to pick a win bet, I think it is Gamine. If I were to play an exacta, I hate to do it because I'm going to give you Gamine and Venetian Harbor. And once again, that's not going to pay anything. So this would be a race. We haven't talked much about this, but the sequence is all stakes races. When you kind of look at 9 there's a good sequence of stakes races. So if you're playing like a pick 4 or something like that, I would probably single Gamine as my one single on the card and hopefully to get prices elsewhere. That's going to be the strategy of a lot of horse players. They're going to single this horse because she just looks like a standout.
So this is more of a sit back, watch, and enjoy.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if she doesn't win and someone like Miss Danvers is, I'm going to be upset that I didn't bet. But I really think this is kind of a sit back. You look at horses when they go off at 1 to 9 or things like odds like that, and horses that were, they return cents on the dollar. That's not my sort of wager. I've never been that person. I'm not going to wager $100 to make a minimal profit. I guess if you're really into the excitement, but to win just a few dollars doesn't do it for me.
All right, let's talk about the big race, and that's the Travers. That's what this weekend is all about. Race number 11. Now, from what I understand, the winner and the runner-up will automatically qualify for the Kentucky Derby based on points. But 'tis the law, really, that he's already qualified. So the co-favorite, Uncle Chuck, right, needs to finish at least third to earn enough points to run in the Derby. That's how this is playing out, correct?
Yeah, so you're going for points. A lot of these horses will need points, and they're hoping to maybe get second and to get a good amount of points to get into the Derby, because you're thinking about it, the Derby's not that long away. It seems like it's really far, but it's not. I mean, it's the first weekend in September. We're already on August. What's today? The 6th? Can't even keep my days straight. So I think there's something else to talk about here too before you even jump into the Travers. But the whole idea with the Triple Crown is you start with the Derby at 1.25 miles. You go to the Preakness 2 weeks later at 1 3/16 miles. And then the ultimate test is the Belmont. That's 3 weeks after that. That's going 1.5 miles. So the way the schedule has always worked is that when you enter the Derby at 1.25 miles, these horses have never raced at 1.25 miles. Now, as far as races in the U.S., the longest race I believe you're going to get is 1 1/8 miles. Any prep race is going to be 1 1/8 miles or shorter. I think the only race that I can think of off the top of my head that's 1 3/16 miles, which is really obviously it's close to 1.25 miles, as in Dubai, and that's in their big winter carnival meet. That is the UAE Derby, and that does give you points, on the road to the Derby. So the whole idea is the Derby is the first time these horses go 1.25 miles. Well, with the Travers this year, they decided to not adjust the distance. So that's kind of a different thing. I don't know how big of a deal it is, but it's definitely changed things. We saw the Belmont, they cut that back from 1.5 miles to 1.8 miles. And I think that was definitely, in my opinion, the right move. I'm not sure how many horses would have gone 1.5 miles at that point in their career, because that's like the ultimate task. When you think about the Triple Crown, you're working towards the Belmont, which is the endurance test. So I don't think if you threw that in front, a lot of horses would have gone. So I think that was the right move. I'm a little surprised here that they didn't cut this back, but I'm not a little surprised. I think it's okay, but it's different this year. These horses are going to race at 1.25 miles, and several of these horses, it looks like they will make the starting gate when it comes to the first Saturday in September.
So 'tis the law. I'm assuming is favored coming into this race. I was reading that the ownership group owned Funnyside, who, if you recall, back in 2003, missed the Travers due to an injury. And I understand horse owners from New York really value Saratoga. Obviously, you said it's one of your favorite, if not your favorite courses, your favorite tracks. So I would imagine the significance of 'tis the law winning this race will be really important to the ownership of this horse.
Yeah, they're called Saratoga Stables. Their main owner, who was part of the Saratoga Stables when Funnyside raced, Jack Knowlton, they love New York, and these people love racing. You'll always see, in articles, even if you pull up from Funnyside or this, they would take a yellow school bus to the track. That was their party bus, and they just really enjoy racing. And so Funnyside was a big deal because he was a New York bred and he won the Derby. Jose Santos rode him, and it was a pretty impressive performance. And even after that, he had good efforts in the Preakness and the Belmont. He was a really great horse. I've actually seen him in retirement, and he was one of my favorite horses. I think typically when people ask me off the top of my head, he was a really special horse to me because I'm from New York. I actually saw his last 2 wins of his career, one of which is at Woodbine, and then his other win came at the Finger Lakes, which when we think about New York racing, you think about Saratoga, then you think about Belmont, and then you think about Aqueduct. But there is another track, and that's the Finger Lakes. It's a small track. It's about, I don't know, an hour and 15 from my house. And they kind of wanted to showcase him in his final start. So they put up enough purse funding that Saratoga Stable says, yeah, we'll bring Funnyside to Finger Lakes. And it was the coolest race I've ever seen, which sounds weird, right? Because it wasn't a graded stakes race. It was a little stakes race just to bring him to the track, and he won. Really cool. So Saratoga, they have another chance with another New York bred this year. And, you know, he's been the hype horse on the Triple Crown Trail. And you kind of look at his progression. He broke his maiden against New York breds here. It's actually interesting. When he races, it'll be a year to the date that he broke his maiden in his debut at Saratoga, which is just weird. I'm just realizing that now. So if you believe in signs, maybe that's your sign. He won really easy. Big number from a buyer perspective for a debut. A 90 is really strong. Then next time out, they put him in the Champagne, which is a grade 1. They knew they kind of had a serious racehorse, and he won by almost the same margin, by 4 lengths, and he got a very similar trip. This time, though, Manny Franco was aboard, and that's who's ridden him since that first graded stakes win. He was third in the Kentucky Jockey Club, which is a grade 2. It was a sloppy track, so it was his first time over the slop, and he still gave it his effort. I mean, he still tried to make a run. It just didn't pan out for him that day, and then he's won his last 3. So the first came in his first start of 2020, which was the grade 3 Holy Bull. Then next time out, you can see he won the Florida Derby, and I think that's when, you know, they always liked him. He went off as the favorite in most of his career starts, but I think once they saw how the Florida Derby unfolded for him and the trip that he got when he was called upon, he had that much run. I think that's really where people are like, okay, could this horse win the Derby for sure? And the Belmont, you know, when we had talked about the Belmont, he was the standout based on that performance in the Florida Derby and how he was training. And, you know, he won the Belmont pretty easy. Now, since that effort, you can see he's kind of been working out. And with Barclay Tagg being in New York, you can see that he has been stabled at New York. His first breeze came on July 18th, 59-3. Had another sharp breeze. And then his most recent was going to be, it's actually to the day, it will be a week from this race, which was on August 1st, 59-4. And I saw an interesting interview when you go through Twitter. They were taking a video, and the instructions to the person that was exercise riding the horse, I believe it was Robin Smolin, it was to go a minute flat. And some trainers get kind of on your case about you have to be like really close, within like, I don't know, a 10th of a second or a 5th of a second. And I guess Barkley didn't see the workout, but they told him that they clocked it at 59.99. And he said that he jokingly said he need better help. But I mean, this horse has just been training phenomenally at Saratoga. Barkley's really happy with him. I believe Saratoga, you know, was able to watch him work out, and he's really hard to ignore. That's who I'm rooting for, and that sounds maybe biased, but he's been a cool horse to follow, and he's been so impressive that, you know, can he win the Triple Crown this year and do it out of order? If he does, I know people say, well, the Belmont wasn't at 1.5 miles, but to now push this Triple Crown back, right? We're usually done in June. We didn't start till June this year. We're going to end in October. That really, to keep a horse this fit for that long during their 3-year-old season, if he could win all 3, I think that really, that is a Triple Crown in my opinion. That'd be pretty cool to see.
Wow. There's a lot of buzz right now with Uncle Chuck, the 3-horse, Baffert's horse, potentially pulling the upset.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know who you're going to be rooting for, but how concerned, if you're scared, say you're scared. How concerned are you about Uncle Chuck?
You have to be concerned about Uncle Chuck. I mean, you know, you saw his maiden win against Maiden Special Weight Company at Santa Anita going a mile, and it looked pretty easy. I talked about a 90 being impressive. He got a 95. Now, last time out, he was in the Los Al Derby. He won pretty easy. I think at the time of that performance, it was good. I didn't think he faced much, but I think since that effort, 1,000 Words has a big win under his belt. So I think that kind of upgrades this performance slightly for me. I still don't think it was this awesome field. It was a grade 3, so that's something to consider. But you have to wonder, have we actually seen the full blown Uncle Chuck yet? I'm not sure. He's been working out really good. I mean, Bob Baffert, you talk about his luck in the Travers. You go back to 2015 with American Pharoah. We talk about it being kind of the, they call it the graveyard of favorites or champions. But I pulled up some facts using Formulator about Bob Baffert. And he's pretty impressive in graded stakes, especially even going 2 turns. I believe he's got a wicked 60% win percentage with 2-turn graded stakes races at Saratoga. So, you can't toss the horse, that's for sure. Bob does a really tremendous job. And I think this is one that we might have not seen the best of. And I think if anyone's really going to challenge Tiz Law, it's going to be this one.
All right, 2 other horses we want to mention. That's the 4-horse Max Player, who you can actually own a share of him. Is that correct?
If you can scroll on Twitter, they've been kind of promoting it. I think it was like $200, or there's some buy-in or something. I forget what the exact number is, but yeah, you could buy into him, and that's what you can see here. The Sports BLX Thoroughbreds, which is, I think it's a cool idea. You can own a share. It's a very small share, but you can say I own a share of Max Player, a horse that
he's like the Green Bay Packers of horse racing, right? Where you could buy into the Packers. Yep. Okay, all right, I get it.
So, kind of looking at his progression, we did mention him in the Belmont. I think you're the one who brought him up. You're like, what about Max Player? He's trained by Linda Rice, who does a tremendous job, currently winning at 21% at Saratoga. Looking at his projection, it took him 2 starts, but in his second start, he broke his maiden at Parks in Philadelphia. And then they put him right in that graded stakes competition in that grade 3, the Withers at Aqueduct, and they stretched him out from 1 mile to 1.1 1/8. He won pretty easy. I mean, he only had 2 horses beat early on. They weren't super strung out, but he beat Shotsky and Portos, who at that time had a lot of respect in this race. And then they put him in the Belmont. And in the Belmont, I mean, he was really far back in that race. And you can see it. He only had 1 horse beaten early on. He did the same thing where he comes from off the pace. And in there, he made up a ton of ground late, and he just missed by 5 1/4. And I think it was a pretty good performance. I don't think he had the best of trips. I mean, it was wide at times in the race, but it's interesting. Linda Rice, she's done really well in graded stakes in Saratoga, but they've been over the turf. That was kind of a thing that I had done some research on. But I think the pace in here, we'll see what it is. I mean, Uncle Chuck has been towards the front. Looking at some others in here, I don't think they're going to go wickedly fast in this race. I don't see that happening, but there's a couple horses in here that might be towards the front, and Max Player is going to hope that they do go fast. That's really the setup that he would prefer.
And last but not least, the 2-horse Country Grammar.
Yeah, Country Grammar broke his maiden in his second start, going 1.1 1/8. So he's going farther than a lot of these horses in here, at least at that point in their career. Then they put him in the Fountain of Youth for his first start of 2020. He finished 5th in there, which was mid-pack. Ate Indian was the winner, who was on the trail for a while. And I believe that's the race that Ate Indian had a extremely wide post position, which I mentioned at Gulfstream Park isn't ideal. But I believe Florent Giroux was aboard and was able to get this horse to the front, and that's where this horse stayed. So it didn't set up beautifully for Country Grammar just off of that fact alone. So after that, he had some time off. And I think when you see this 3rd place performance in this allowance event, it's all right. It's not great. But you can see the winner of that was Tap to Win, who raced this past weekend at Saratoga. I think finished 3rd in a stakes race there. So that at least gives you some confidence out of that performance. And then last time, this one won the Peter Pan. And I think the big difference for him was that he was actually able to be somewhat closer to the pace early on, especially kind of looking at where he was halfway through the race. I think that was a really big turning point, that he was closer. He only won by a neck in there. The horse that finished right behind him's in here as well. That's the 7. But he's a horse maybe to use underneath. I mean, this is going to be a class test, though, because Uncle Chuck and Tiz the Law, they're no joke. So now he's going from a grade 3 to a grade 1, and he's facing 2 of the hype horses right now on the road to the Derby.
All right. So how are you playing it?
I have to use Tiz the Law on top. I feel bad tossing Uncle Chuck. I just think Tiz the Law is the winner, so I'd probably put a win bet on Tiz the Law And just to be safe, though, I would also play an exacta, and I'm going to hope that someone like maybe Max Player can get second. So to cover myself, you never know what happens with horse racing, I'd use Uncle Chuck on top as well as Tis the Law. So that would look like I'd go to on my phone, I type in 3-6 with the 4. This race, I think, will be interesting to see what the odds are at post time. I still think Tis the Law will be the favorite, but I think it'll be pretty close between him and Uncle Chuck.
Fantastic. So out of all the races, what is the one that you're most looking forward to on Saturday?
I think from a betting perspective, odds wise, I think it's going to be interesting to see the Troy. I love turf racing, and don't get me wrong, I like dirt racing as well, but kind of looking at the races that we covered, that was a race that kind of stuck out to me from a betting perspective, because I think depending on the odds, that could sway me to go different directions, because I don't think on paper one horse looks like the clear winner. That's kind of a tricky race to handicap. But I think for, people that tune into the show and they want to play, for example, a pick 4 or something, I do think the late pick 4 is a good sequence. It starts in race 9, which is a grade 3. We didn't talk about this race. It's not a big field by any means, but what hopefully could happen is if you can get Tis the Law or Gamine beaten in one of those races, that should add a better price then. And then the big thing for me is it's really nice at Saratoga that the day ends in a maiden special weight event. I prefer it on the turf. I always think there's a little bit more value there, but there's a field of 9 runners, and maybe you can get a price in that last leg. The only thing that's going to stink is in the pick 4 is if Gamine wins and Tis the Law wins, or even Uncle Chuck, the pick 4 is not going to pay much. So you got to kind of weigh your options and just kind of look at what you think the odds are going to shake out. So.
All right. So where are you going to be on Saturday? Are you going to be?
Saturday, I'm going to be in New Jersey. So it's the Travers, but it's also the $1 Million Hambletonian. There's 16 races at the Meadowlands. Most of them are stakes races, so it's a crazy card. We also have the Hambletonian Oaks, which I guess if you want to compare it to things, it's like the Derby and the Kentucky Oaks on the same day. So that's $600,000. And I figure I should tell you, because I know you're really keen on girls going against the boys. But the morning line favorite in the Hambletonian is a filly by the name of Ramona Hill. Kind of interesting how it works in harness racing is there's eliminations. So there were eliminations last week. She won her elimination very impressively, so she made the final. So she's going for $1 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she's going to take the boys. She's the only filly in the race, and she's.
I love it. I love it.
I had to tell you about that ahead of time.
Well, it sounds like you're going to have a great Saturday. Hopefully we all will as well, with your picks and your plays, and exciting Travers. So guys, thank you. And gals, thank you so much for watching Betting After Dark. Ashley, you rock as always. And good luck on Saturday, everybody. And when we're back, heading into
2 weeks, I think, right?
Right. We're back in 2 weeks. So make sure follow us on Twitter, and make sure you watch our next broadcast as well. Good luck on Saturday.